Hey there, my name is Sherry Lawson. Welcome if you're watching this video. This is the first in a series of, I'm hoping, will be many videos over the next, few years. I'm turning 70 this year, and the older I get, the more anxiety I have and the harder it is for me to figure out, what happened in my life that has created so much anxiety and depression in me. So I'm hoping that maybe by talking about it and, um, just reliving some of the things that I went through, maybe it will help me understand. What I've come to realize in the last little while, though, in fact, it came to me just the other day and it actually made me cry. I have, and I've got little Clyde here. He's my cushy pillow. I love him so much. He just makes me feel much more comfortable. So sometimes I have a hard time getting the words out. They sound perfect in my brain. I don't know why it is that when I go to speak, my thoughts get all jumbled and it just doesn't come out as eloquently as it does in my brain. So the first thing I want to talk about is how I've given birth to four beautiful babies. My fourth one, Candace, died of SIDS at 3 months old. That was probably the worst pain I've ever been in. That was pretty traumatic. I found her in her crib not breathing, so that was a very traumatic moment. It took me a long time to get over that. All of my kids were at home at the time, and we also had, I was also babysitting some after school kids, so there were 9 kids in my house total when I went to her crib and found her face down, not breathing. So that kind of changed me a bit. But then I have 3 other kids. My youngest surviving daughter, Kira, has been just a bright light for her whole life. She struggled a little bit when she was 15, got in trouble, ended up getting pregnant, and but they were insistent on getting married and raising the child, and so that was a really rough thing, but they seemed to be really mature about it, and we allowed them to do that. And for 20 years, they had a beautiful, marriage. They raised 3 beautiful boys. But after a few car accidents and other, challenges, she got into some little bit of trouble and was really struggling to kind of hold herself together. And when she went through the roughest patch, her husband decided that he wanted a divorce. And so after 20 years of marriage, he kind of left her. They sold their house. She ended up renting an apartment, and because she had been broken so badly, she just kind of went downhill and had some real bad struggles. She had the boys with her, and she ended up losing the apartment she was living in. And after roughing it for a while, literally living in her car, living in hotels, she'd got a little bit of the equity money from the house. She just, was trying to find her way. Her heart had been ripped out and stomped on and thrown away, and she just, she didn't know what else to do. So eventually, after quite a few months of her living that way, I convinced her to come and live with us because my son had recently moved out. He had been with us for 3 years, and he is struggling mentally and emotionally, and he has for a long time. When he was 24, 25, he was diagnosed as bipolar. One of the doctors was convinced he was also ADHD, and he's just kind of been incapable of finding any kind of security, holding down a job. But he's got a girlfriend now, and he lives with her. They live together. She's a she's a really intelligent, person. She's getting her degree, and she's a senior at Utah Tech, getting her degree in chemistry. So they seem to be doing okay now, but it was interesting how it worked out that Jamin had been with us for 3 years, and then he had just moved out when Kira suddenly really needed a place to stay, and we only have one extra bedroom. So Kira came to live with us, and it's just been beautiful having her since I lost her so young. And she was such a great mom. She never really needed my help, and it was just kind of meant to be. And she's just been doing really well. She's been in a really nurturing environment here. So that's been great. And then my middle daughter, Chelsea, when she was 25, she was diagnosed with cancer. And she really battled for about 18 months. The cancer had literally invaded her heart. It was a giant tumor in her chest. And after many rounds of chemotherapy and radiation, it ended up going to her brain. And so they did immediate, just did a craniotomy on her and removed the tumor. Fortunately, it was in the frontal lobe. And she was able to, they were able to get it all with, to the margins, and there was none left. So they thought. So they were continuing to do chemo and radiation to make sure they got it all. And after 6 weeks of that, they did another MRI of her brain, and the tumor had come back. And there was a tiny spot in her brain. And they said, we've got to do radiation, and really focus on that spot, get that gone. And then the only way you're going to survive is with a stem cell transplant. So she ended up having a stem cell transplant, which literally saved her life. And now she's, let's see, that was in 2007, I think it was 2007. She was cured, and she's been cancer-free ever since, which is such a blessing. And now she's married, happily married. She had some repercussions from it. She's not able to have children, and her husband really wanted babies. But they're doing really well, so I'm really happy for that. But when I was going through all of the struggles that each one of them have had, I don't know, as a mother, I just somehow took that on as I had done something wrong. That somehow, if it hadn't been for me, they would have, they wouldn't have had all the struggles that they're having. That somehow I failed them in teaching them as they were growing up. And that really haunts me. It just haunts me. And so I thought, well, all of the things I've been through in my life may have, had a deep impact on my relationship with my kids. Even though I tried to do the best I could. We were devout Mormon all the time they were growing up. I no longer am, but as they were growing up, I was devout Mormon. But I felt like I was living just kind of superficially. I felt like I was on autopilot, and my whole life consisted of getting up, getting kids ready, getting me ready, and I worked for the whole time they were growing up. So most of the time I had a full-time job. My ex-husband, always worked. He had in the last 10 years of our marriage, we were married for 24 years. And after I forgot what I was saying. Let's see. Anyway, yeah, when he had a carpet cleaning business, And he did really well for a while. We had about 4 years there where we didn't have to stress about money or whatever, and it was really good. But then we'd been struggling for a long time, especially me. I'd been struggling. I felt like I'll get into more of that later because that's a whole different story. Is how I think I finally left him. But I left him. We were divorced. I found someone who I believe is my soulmate. We've been together for 20 years, and I'm sure we'll be together till we both die. But so the reason I even tell all those stories about my kids, and I hope they don't mind me being so, blunt about everything, but we talk about it, and I don't think it's anything they're trying to hide. But because I feel like that's right, that's what I was saying, is I felt like I was on automatic pilot all the time, just doing what the church wanted me to do, going to church every Sunday, not really getting out into any social circles except for the church, where everything was kind of, planned out for what we would do, how we would act, what we would eat, what we would wear. And that's how I lived. And I feel like I didn't give my kids the kind of nurturing, it's like I feel like I watch people on TV and, mothers that are curling up next to their kids in bed and reading them stories and, having really nurturing time. And I don't remember ever having that. It's like I gave my kids the basics that they needed. They had shelter, they had food, they had clothes, they went to school, all of that. But I feel like all of them needed a little bit more. And as a mom, I was rather cold and distant. They don't believe that. They say that that's not true, but I feel like I could have been far more nurturing and giving them the support that they needed when they were young. So I don't know if that's true. But when I get into a little bit more of my story of how, how I was raised and how I grew up, I'll get into that a little bit today. And then each day I'm going to, or each video, I'm going to try and fill in a little more of the gaps, or, a few more of the gaps. So, so that's a little bit about, just the current history and a little bit of the past history. And now I think I'll just get into some of the more traumatic things that happened to me as a child. And I'm not disrespecting my parents because I love them. And I know that they did the best they could do under their circumstances. But some of the things that happened to me as a child have really haunted me all these years. So my first memory was waking up in a hospital, and I had these funny stitches down below my belly button, quite a few of them. There was a long scar there, and I had no idea why it was there. I remember pulling on the stitches, and the nurse had to keep telling me, don't do that, don't do that. And that's my earliest memory. I remember my dad's brother, Dick, brought me a little Indian doll, and I loved that doll so much. I wish I still had it. Little did I know that later in the 90s I would become obsessed with Native American culture, and I actually made a teepee, from scratch. I made Native American type, jewelry and medicine wheels and dream catchers and mandalas. Sold them for a while, studied under a Native American shaman. And that was really cool. Anyway, that's a whole nother story. So let's get back to me in the hospital. So after that, some of my memories, I remember we were living in Cedar City, Utah. That's where I was born. And we had lived there, I'm not sure, but I think for the first 5 years of my life. And then something happened, I don't know what, but we ended up moving up north to the Salt Lake area. I think we lived in Woods Cross, Utah for a little while, and then we moved to Bountiful. And so for 3 years, we were there, and those I call my nightmare years. I remember, again, waking up in the hospital several times. And this is kind of a trigger warning. If you don't like scary stuff and parent abuse and it triggers you, you might want to turn this off and just come back a little later. So I just want you to know that it's a little bit scary. But I woke up in the hospital not knowing why I was there, and this was when I was about 5 or 6. I don't know for sure. I remember being in this large room with a bunch of other beds in there, and I remember looking out the window crying for my mom. And nurses would come in and put me back to bed, and it was just a really scary time. And it wasn't until years later as a teenager that I found out that my mom most likely had Munchausen syndrome by proxy. My brother and I came home a few times and found her unconscious on the floor. And so we would be farmed out to other people, and she would go to the hospital, and that would last about 3 days. And that happened several times. And my dad was a truck driver. And every time she went into the hospital, he would have to come off the road. And so he would come home, take care of her. And then after a while, he wouldn't come home anymore. He knew that she was just doing this for attention. And so he quit coming home for her. And so she decided, well, if he won't come home for me, I'm sure he'll come home for his daughter, his little baby daughter. And so she started drugging me. And she had some pretty strong pain medications that she was taking. And so I would, go unconscious and end up in the hospital. And I remember one time not waking up, but being in the hospital, and they took me down into this little secluded room with all these wires and things, and they hooked, electrodes up to my head, my brain, and I didn't know it at the time, but, later learned they were probably trying to see if I had any brain damage from the drugs and from being drugged like that. So I don't know what they ever found, but I've often wondered, is that what's wrong? Is there something that, happened to me and my brain just doesn't function as well as it should? I don't know. But there are about 3 times that I remember that happening. And then one day we had people that were just banging on our door. They would just bang and bang and bang. They even broke the frame on our door. And my mom, at first wouldn't get it, wouldn't go to the door to see who was there, because I guess she was too afraid. We were too afraid. We didn't know, they weren't just knocking, they were literally banging on the door. And I remember one time a guy named Frank that lived underneath us. He was just such a cool guy. He was a, cigarette smoking, beer drinking, rowdy guy with a heart of gold. He just, he came up with a shotgun, and he went and he opened the door and he started screaming out the door, you stop that, quit doing that. And I remember that, and it was just, so comforting to know that someone was there and someone cared, and they were trying to, stop this from happening. And then I don't remember the incident, but the next thing we knew, we were in the car with my dad going to live with my grandma in Cedar City, which was, southern Utah. We were living in northern Utah. And my dad stopped someplace right after we'd started. And And he left me in the car because I was asleep at the time. But then I woke up and I didn't know where I was. And I waited and waited and waited because I really had to pee really bad. And I was, like I said, 7 or 8 by this time. And so I finally got out and went up to the door and knocked on the door, and nobody came. So I walked in the door and I was looking around, and all of a sudden my dad and this woman in a little negligee came out of her room. And I just kind of looked at him and didn't know what that meant at the time. I was way too young. So I said, I got to go to the bathroom. And so my dad said, you shouldn't have come in here. You should have, you should have waited in the car. And I said, I have to pee. So anyway, I peed, and then he came out and we went on our way. And that was when, we ended up at my grandma's, and we were there for 3 months. And I missed my mom so much. I remember when she finally came to get us, I ran to her. We went to meet her at the bus station, and as soon as she got off the bus, I remember just running to her and jumping in her arms and just crying because I just felt so complete now that she was there. And then the next few years were probably the happiest of my life. We moved to a little town called Parowan, Utah, which was just a few miles north of Cedar City, where I was born. And her brother lived there with his family and had for a long time. And so he kind of helped her get set up. We were renting this amazing, amazing little house with an upstairs and vaulted ceilings. It was an old white house. I don't even know how to describe it, but it was amazing. The living room was so large. My mom used to do what are they called? Oh my gosh, I forgot. Oh my gosh, what are they called? Those things, I keep thinking of jumping jacks, but it's cartwheels. Yeah, cartwheels. My mom would do cartwheels in the living room, and she would make homemade taffy, and we would pull homemade taffy, which was amazing. I remember how we'd butter our hands and then have to get the taffy while it was still hot. And I remember my hands getting all red but not burned. It was just amazing. And we would, pull the taffy and twist it and then cut it up into little pieces. And it was always delicious. I wish I had her recipe. I don't have the recipe for that homemade taffy. Excuse me. But then she would make divinity. She made divine divinity. I don't think anybody even knows what a divinity is anymore, but it was really, really good. And then she would make fudge. We would come home from school, for lunch every day, and she would have a hot meal and sandwiches fixed for us. And then we would just walk back to school. I remember one time coming home, there was a blizzard, and the blizzard was so heavy that I couldn't find my brother, so I had to walk home alone. I don't know how I made it, because I remember we couldn't even see in front of our faces. It was such a bad blizzard. But I finally made it home. My brother had made it home too. He said he wasn't able to find me. And my mom wouldn't let us go back to school that day because of the blizzard. They didn't have snow days in Utah. You went to school come hell or high water, and Utah has some pretty bad snowstorms, especially up north. So those were my wonderful years. I remember them fondly. I call that my magic house. My mom would even lay in bed and read with us for a while. So I remember those books that she used to read to us. They were amazing. I don't remember the names of them. I just remember the stories. They were so beautiful. And I think that that's all I'm going to do for now. I think that that's enough. You've got my early years up to my, up to my happy times. And next time I'll kind of get into what happened next, to try and make some sense out of this. So I hope you're enjoying listening to this, and I hope that it's going to help me let go of this depression that I battle every day and the anxiety that I battle every day. Maybe it'll help me find some answers and be able to put that all behind me once I've told the story. So thank you very much for listening. I'm going to try to post videos every Wednesday, and I hope that works. And since I have a telephone ringing right now, I'm going to stop the video and say again, thank you very much for listening. I appreciate you. Bye.